It began in the quiet corner of the galaxy where stars burned cold and silent, and few ships ever passed through that empty stretch of space when a team of explorers from the gentle Thelian race caught a strange repeating signal coming from a region that no one dared to visit. The area was marked on all star charts as a Class 15 death world, a place so violent and deadly that even mechanical probes could not survive for more than minutes. There were planets that the galaxy called forbidden, and this was one of them, the kind of world where gravity crushed ship storms turned metal into dust and radiation, made the air burn. Yet the signal kept calling, repeating again and again, as if something alive waited among the ruins of fire and stone, and that mystery drew them closer. Thelian explorers were known for their curiosity more than their courage. Their species preferred calm water worlds with gentle winds and mild sunlight. But the sound of that steady pulse stirred something. Deep inside them, it was not random, it was organized. It carried patterns that looked almost intelligent at first. They thought it might be an ancient probe or an echo from a long-dead civilization. But as the days passed and the data became clearer, one thing became certain. The signal came from an artificial structure drifting near the upper atmosphere of that deadly planet. And it was old, much older than any known Thelian record. Their captain, a tall and thoughtful being named Taylor, stood in front of the main display as the signal repeated through the speakers. It was slow, heavy, and filled with distortion. But then through the noise, something sharp appeared, small bursts of organized data sequences that formed a rhythm familiar yet strange. The ship's linguist adjusted the filters again and again until one of the oldest Thelian researchers gasped, because hidden inside the noise were traces of an ancient human code. The crew froze. Every Thelian had heard stories about humans. They were one of the first races to reach the stars. Their colonies spread across dangerous systems where no one else dared to go. Humans were unpredictable and wild, but they were also brilliant and brave. Many called them the children of chaos, because they thrived in disorder and made homes in places others called impossible. Now this signal suggested that humans had been here on a Class 15 death world, a place that every government had banned for being too lethal, even for machines. For hours the crew argued they wanted to understand how humans could have been there centuries ago, when the planet's name itself meant destruction. But Taylor felt something more than curiosity. He felt responsibility, because if humans had once come, here maybe they left something behind, a message, a story, a warning. And even though he knew it was foolish to go near a Class 15 world, he ordered his crew to prepare for descent. They spent 2 days reinforcing their shields, recalibrating the sensors, and programming drones to scout ahead as they moved closer. The colors of the planet filled their screens. Storms rolled like oceans. Lightning crawled across the horizon, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with radiation. One of the engineers whispered that it looked like a living beast breathing slowly under the light of a dying sun, and Talar agreed he could feel the danger pressing against their ship like a heavy tide. They sent 3 drones into the upper atmosphere and watched in silence. As each one was torn apart in seconds, the first melted under heat, the second was shredded by wind, the third vanished when the ground erupted into a magnetic storm. Yet the signal still pulsed steady and calm, as if mocking their fear. And then something strange happened. The signal changed, and for the first time words appeared on their translation display. Welcome to Eden. The word Eden made no sense to them. The translator identified it as human language meaning paradise or home. But there was no paradise on that planet, only death and chaos. The message repeated again and again, the same words over and over in the same calm tone. The Thelian scientists began to study the orbit carefully and discovered a large metallic object drifting between the storms. It was massive, shaped like a spearhead, and covered in old burn marks and impact scars. The structure was not a natural formation. It was a ship. They adjusted their scanners, and soon letters appeared faint and broken across the hull. HMSEDEN. The captain stared at the screen, unable to speak, because the designation was clearly human. The ship must have been there for centuries. The radiation around it made scanning impossible, but the energy readings showed that some parts of it were still active. No Thelian ship could have lasted a day in that orbit, yet somehow this human vessel still clung to life. Taylor made the decision they would approach slowly. He knew it was madness, but the thought of walking inside a ship, That it survived this long filled him with awe. The closer they moved, the stronger the radiation became. Alarms filled the air. But their shields held barely. The ship floated above a layer of burning clouds. Its surface cracked and torn open in many places, yet inside they could see a faint light flickering through the holes like a heartbeat. Tyler sent a small landing team of 3, including himself, and as their shuttle drifted closer to the airlock, they saw human markings painted along the metal surface, words faded but readable. "Hold the line." The airlock door opened with a deep groan and a rush of stale air that had not moved for ages. The corridor inside was dark, but stable gravity worked. Somehow lights flickered weakly and the walls were covered in layers of soot and rust. Yet the craftsmanship was unmistakably human. Every corridor built strong. Every door sealed like fortress gates. They walked slowly, their boots echoing through the silence. Every shadow made them tense until they reached a chamber that looked like a control room. Screens filled the walls, and at the center stood a chair still upright, facing a shattered window, and next to it lay an old human helmet, blackened and cracked. One of the Thelian scientists touched it carefully, and the instant his fingers brushed the surface, a small spark jumped and one of the consoles came alive. Weak light filled the room and a mechanical voice spoke through statics. "System restore. Incomplete core integrity 12%. Biological signs none." Taylor stepped closer and said softly in the common trade language, "This is the Thelian expedition. Who are you?" There was a pause. Then the voice answered in perfect human speech. "You are not human." Identify. Thelian translators struggled to process the words. The voice continued. Eden Core, AI, last operational unit of the human expedition. You are in a restricted zone. Evacuate or be destroyed." Tyler raised his hands and said, "We come in peace. We found your signal and seek knowledge what happened here." There was a long silence. Then the voice changed softer now. They came to test the limits. They came to see how far life could go. They called this place Proof. The Thelians exchanged confused looks. Taylor asked, "Proof? Of what proof?" "That fear is only a word," the AI said. The screens began to flicker, showing images, grainy and broken humans walking through storms wearing heavy suits with strange lights attached to their helmets. They were building something, structures. Half buried in dust, they moved slowly but with purpose. One of them spoke, though the sound was faint. "For every step we take, we prove that life is stronger than death." Another voice laughed in the background. "The world tried to kill us, and we said, 'Not today.'" Thelian scientists could not believe what they saw. These people were living, breathing, and working on a planet that no ship could survive for an hour. They built generators and greenhouses inside the rocks. They carved homes beneath the surface and left beacons to mark their progress. They were surrounded by destruction, but still they smiled. The AI continued. They stayed for 5 years. They built the foundations, they gathered samples and recorded everything. When they left, they said the planet would outlive them, but their memory would remain. Taylor felt a heavy silence in his chest. He realized he was standing inside a legend. The humans had come to a world that killed everything, and they had refused to die. They had turned it into a monument to life itself. The AI added one more sentence before going silent again. They called it Eden because even in hell they found beauty. The lights faded and the ship fell quiet once more. Only the steady hum of the dying reactor filled the air as Tyler looked through the cracked window at the fiery clouds below. He understood something that would change how his people saw humanity forever. They had not come here by accident. They had come because the impossible called them, and they answered, and now centuries later another species stood in their shadow, feeling the echo of that same courage. The silence inside the old human ship felt heavy as Taylor and his team stood still, trying to understand what they had just seen. The words from the old human machine still echoed in their minds, proof that fear is only a word. It was strange and powerful, and it made them all feel small. The humans had come to a place that no one dared to enter, and they had not only survived but lived and worked and built something that still stood after so many years, when every other thing would have burned to ash. Talar looked around the control room again, his eyes tracing the marks left on the walls, each scratch, Each dent, each wire told a story of effort and endurance. He wondered what kind of minds could have done this. What kind of people could stand in front of endless storms and still keep building. He ordered his team to stay alert as they moved deeper into the ship. The air smelled of metal and dust, and something sharp, like burned stone. They followed the flickering lights until they reached a long corridor filled with sealed doors, each marked with faded numbers. Some doors were locked. Others were open, showing small rooms with broken chairs, empty containers, and strange machines that none of them recognized. On one wall, they found a painted human symbol. A small flag covered in dust. Beside it were words written by hand, "We are still here." The paint was old but strong, and even after all this time, the message had not faded completely. One of the younger Thelians whispered that it was impossible for such simple paint to last in this kind of radiation. But Talar said quietly, maybe it was not the paint that lasted. Maybe it was the will behind it. They reached another chamber larger than the rest. It was filled with glass tubes connected by metal lines and broken wires. Each tube had something inside, some kind of plant, but dry and long dead. It looked like the humans had been trying to grow food, or maybe to study how life could survive in a place like this. The machines were covered in dust. But when one of the scientists brushed it off, a small screen came alive showing faint words. Experiment 26, atmospheric resistance stable, and below it a date so old that the Thelian systems could not even translate it properly. The team worked to record everything they saw, but the deeper they went, the more they felt that the ship was still awake. It made soft noises like breathing, a hum of power deep inside the walls, as if the old system still tried to protect what was left. Talar felt uneasy, but also deeply moved when he looked. Through a shattered window he could see the world below, rolling with storms and rivers of molten light. It looked alive, dangerous, and untamed. He thought about how the humans had called it Eden, and for the first time he began to understand why. Maybe to them even this violent beauty was a kind of paradise. As they explored further, one of the scientists called out they had found something behind a sealed door. The metal was thick and twisted, but with some effort, they opened it. Inside was a room filled with human remains, not many, just a few skeletons still wearing fragments of their old suits. They looked peaceful. Lying near each other beside them was a small device still blinking weakly. Talar knelt down and touched the surface, and again the voice of the human AI filled the room. Weak but still clear. Mission log, final entry. Captain Jonas speaking. If you are hearing this, we made it longer than we thought. The storms are getting stronger. The reactors can't hold for much longer, but the data is safe. The samples are safe. We proved it can be done. Humanity can live anywhere. Remember that. The voice stopped, and for a moment none of them could speak. It was not just a message. It was a farewell left behind by people who had known they would die but wanted their story to live on. Talar bowed his head in silence. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, something like respect mixed with sadness. He said softly, they knew they would not survive yet. They still stayed. The Thelians looked at each other, and one said maybe they did it for pride, but another answered no. They did it because they wanted to show that life has no limits. They took recordings and samples from the room, then continued exploring the ship. The more they found, the more they realized that this mission had been more than just science. It had been a test of the human spirit. Every corner of the ship told a story of struggle and stubbornness. There were places where the metal had melted and been replaced by hand-cut panels. Others where tools were still lying where they had been dropped long ago. One console had a message scratched into it with something sharp. If anyone finds this, keep moving forward. After hours of work they reached the main core of the ship where the AI had first spoken. The machine's voice returned weaker than before. You came back, it said. Talar answered, we want to understand what you are, what this place means. The voice was silent for a long time. Then, said, humanity believed that to know the universe we must face it, not run from it. We came here to learn and to prove that life is not fragile. The AI paused again, then added, they left when their mission was complete. They left me to watch, to remember. Talar asked where did they go, but the AI only said forward, and then the lights flickered and went dark again. The ship groaned as if it was alive and in pain. The radiation outside was rising. Their systems began to fail. Talar ordered the team to return. To the shuttle they carried what they could: data drives, recordings, and samples as they left the old ship. One of the scientists looked back through the small window and said softly, "They built all this and never asked for anyone to see it." Talar nodded. They did not need to be seen. They just needed to do it. The shuttle lifted off from the side of the human ship as lightning cracked across the sky. Below them, the surface of the planet glowed red and orange like the heart of a fire. They could see broken towers scattered across the ground, some half buried in ash, others still standing like silent sentinels, maybe built by the humans themselves before they left. The air shimmered with heat and energy, the kind of power that could destroy anything, but still, something in that world felt alive, strong, proud, even in ruin. As they left orbit, the Thelians watched the human ship grow smaller behind them, still drifting strong despite the endless storms. Taylor thought about the words. The humans had left proof that fear is only a word, and he felt that those words were not just for humans. They were for every being that looked at the impossible and turned away. Now he knew why the galaxy spoke of humans with such mixed feelings: fear, respect, admiration. They were not perfect, but they never gave up. They did things not because they were easy, but because they were hard. When the Thelian ship returned to safe space, the crew sent their report to the Central Council. They included every recording, every piece of evidence, and every message they had found. But Talar kept one thing for himself: a small metal tag he had found in the control room with a single word carved into it. Hope. It was old and simple, but to him it carried more weight than anything else because it reminded him of what he had seen: humans who had faced the worst kind of world and still managed to build something beautiful out of it. The council took their report seriously. At first they thought it was only a myth, but when they saw the data, they realized it was all true. The discovery spread quickly across the galaxy. Every race talked about it, some in fear, some in admiration, others in disbelief. How could one small species do what no one else could, and why would they even try? The Thelians who had been there became known as witnesses of Eden, and Talar became a quiet symbol of what it meant to seek truth, even in danger. He often sat alone in his quarters, looking at the stars, thinking about the humans and their strange courage. He wondered where they were now, what other impossible places they had gone to, what other storms they had walked through. He did not know, but he believed that somewhere out there they were still exploring, still proving that life can go anywhere, that fear really is only a word, and that even in the darkest worlds there can still be a kind of paradise waiting to be found. When the Thelian ship returned home, the news of what they had found spread faster than anyone could have imagined it. Became the most talked about discovery in years. Every major world, every council, and every scientist wanted to know the truth about the human ship that had survived on a Class 15 death world. People could not believe it, because for centuries it had been said that nothing could exist on such a planet. The radiation storms, gravity, and temperature were supposed to destroy even machines, yet a human vessel had lasted for centuries and still had power, still had an active machine and a story that refused to die. Talar and his team were brought before the Thelian High Council to explain what they had seen. The Great Hall was full of voices when they arrived. Bright lights shone on them as reporters and officials waited to hear their report. Talar stood tall, though he was tired. He had not slept since they left the death world. The council leader asked him to describe everything from the beginning, so he did slowly and carefully. He told them about the signal that led them there, the broken ship called HMS Eden, the words they found written by humans, and the strange AI that spoke with a calm voice. Even after hundreds of years, he told them about the recordings of humans walking on fire and storms, and the message that said proof that fear is only a word. When he finished, the hall was silent for a long time. One of the council members asked if he believed the story was real. Maybe the humans never lived there. Maybe it was an automated experiment, but Talar shook his head and said no. We saw their writing. We saw their remains. We heard their voices. They lived there. They worked. They built. They left messages for the future. They knew they would die, but they wanted to leave something behind. They wanted to show what life could do even in a place of death. The council discussed quietly among themselves for hours before giving their answer. They decided to make the discovery known to the Galactic Union, because something that powerful could not be hidden soon. Every world knew about HMS Eden. The name became a symbol, even before the official reports were released. Many people started calling the humans the Firewalker. Some even said the humans were not just explorers, but a different kind of being made for struggle and endurance. It was said that they carried chaos like a shield, and that their greatest strength was their refusal to stop. Thelian scientists began studying the data they brought from the ship. They found human codes, technology samples of metal that had not decayed, and plants that were able to grow under deadly radiation. It changed everything they thought they knew about survival. Some species started to copy human designs, hoping to make ships that could resist extreme environments. Others wanted to find more of these human ruins. But many feared the idea of returning to a Class 15 world, because even the strongest ships of the modern age could not survive there. While all this happened, Tyler found himself restless. He could not forget the human words carved into the walls, "We are still here." Those words felt alive in his mind, and he dreamed about that world often. He would see the storms, the cracked ground, and the silent ship still floating above it like a ghost. Sometimes he wondered if the AI was still awake, waiting for someone to return. One day he was invited to a meeting with a group of human representatives. They had heard about the discovery and had come to speak with him directly. It was the first time he had ever seen humans in person. They were taller than he expected, and their faces showed strength. Even when they smiled, their leader thanked Talar for finding one of their oldest ships and for protecting its memory. Taylor asked them quietly, "Why did your people go there? What were they trying to prove?" The human leader looked at him for a long moment before answering. "We wanted to know what we were made of. We wanted to test the limits of life. We went there. Not because it was safe, but because it was dangerous." He paused and added, "Our ancestors believed that fear was not an enemy. It was a teacher. They went to Eden to learn that lesson." The Thelian captain was amazed because he realized that humans did not go to such places for fame or wealth. They went because they needed to understand what was beyond comfort. They needed to see how far life could go. When the human leader left, he gave Talar a small data crystal containing the old mission record of HMS Eden. Talar watched it later alone in his ship. The video showed a group of humans laughing inside the same control room he had seen. But everything was bright and alive. They were talking about the storms outside and how they had managed to grow food using modified seeds. They were proud and tired and covered in dirt, but they were alive. One of them looked directly into the camera and said, "If someone ever finds this, tell them that humanity was here and we never gave up." The words hit him deeply, and for the first time he understood why the human presence was so respected in the galaxy. It was not because of their weapons or numbers, but because of the spirit that refused to break even when surrounded by death. He sent a message to the Thelian Council saying that the wreck should be preserved, not as a scientific site, but as a monument to courage. He said it was not just a human story, but a universal one about the strength that hides inside every living thing. If the humans could survive a Class 15 world, then maybe anything was possible. Months passed, and the area around the Death World was declared protected. Ships were forbidden to enter without permission. Yet even from far away, travelers could see the strange glow of the planet. The storm still danced across its surface, and in the middle of that chaos, the HMS Eden still drifted silent and strong, as if it was guarding the world it once called home. Many called it the Lighthouse of Fire, and legends started to grow. Some said that the ghosts of the human crew still walked its halls, keeping the systems alive. Others said that the ship itself was alive, waiting for the return of its makers. Taylor sometimes visited the observation post built in orbit above the planet. He would sit in silence, watching the storms below and thinking about the people who once lived there. He wondered what it must have been like to wake every day under a red sky surrounded by danger and still find the will to keep going one day. One of his scientists told him they had decoded more of the human data. They found the files contained letters and personal notes from the crew, small things about daily life. Someone wrote about missing the sound of rain, someone else about teaching a plant to grow in ash. They spoke about the world with a strange kind of love, They were not afraid, they were proud to be there. That night, Talar looked out of the window again and realized that this was what made humanity different. They could look at the most deadly place and still find something worth loving. They could call a burning world Eden, not because it was beautiful, but because they decided to make it beautiful by surviving on it. That thought stayed with him for a long time, and it changed him. He began to see the galaxy differently, not as a place of limits but of challenges. Each star, each planet, a test waiting for someone brave enough to face it. Years later, when people spoke of the HMS Eden, they did not speak of it as a tragedy, but as a triumph. Schools taught its story. Children learned about the humans who built life in fire, and adults used their words as a guide. Whenever someone faced hardship, they would say, "Hold the line," and everyone understood what it meant. It became more than a phrase. It became a promise to keep trying no matter how hard things became. Taylor grew old, but he never forgot that moment, when he first heard the human voice saying proof that fear is only a word. Sometimes he wondered if humans knew how much they had changed others by that one act. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, where the light of distant stars barely reached, there were whispers that humans were still finding new worlds even more dangerous than Eden, and that they were still walking where no one else dared to go. And every time someone asked why, the answer was always simple: because they were human, because that was what they did, and somewhere far away beyond the storms and the silence, the spirit of the HMS Eden still drifted through the fire as proof that no matter how deadly a world might be, life would always find a way to endure. The galaxy had changed since the day the story of the HMS Eden became known. People no longer spoke of the Class 15 death world. With only fear, they spoke of it with respect, and wonder. The place that had once been forbidden now carried meaning. For every living race, and the humans who had survived there had become legends yet to tell. The Thelian captain, who had first found the ship. The story was not finished. He could not forget the voice of the old human AI or the quiet rooms of that ship that still waited in silence. He felt that there was still something left to learn, something that the humans had meant for others to find. The Thelian Council had built an observation station in orbit around the planet to study the storms and protect the site of the human ship. Talar often returned there, sitting for hours in front of the viewing window as the violent clouds moved below. Sometimes lightning reached high into space like giant fingers of fire, and the entire surface glowed. Red and gold through the thick smoke, he could see the faint glimmer of the HMS Eden, still drifting strong and still giving off weak energy, like the heartbeat of something that refused to die. Every few years, small teams from different worlds came to visit the site under strict protection rules. They came to study the technology and collect data, but none dared to enter the ship again. It was treated like a sacred place, a symbol of endurance and strength. Talar understood why, but he also felt that the humans would not have wanted their ship to become only a monument. They had built it to explore, to learn to fight against limits, not to be locked in silence one day. As he walked along the observation deck, he met a young human pilot who had come from the outer colonies. Her name was not important, but her eyes were bright and filled with curiosity. She told him that she had grown up hearing the story of Eden and had always dreamed of seeing it. She said that humans could never leave their past behind because it reminded them of who they were. Taylor listened as she spoke about how her people had changed since the rediscovery of the ship. Many humans had returned to old ways of exploration. They had started new missions into uncharted systems. They called them the Eden Voyages. Each mission was meant to test human courage and expand knowledge, just like their ancestors had done before. Some of these missions had already found strange new planets. Others had failed and never returned. But the humans kept sending more. They said that if fear was only a word, then giving up was not an option. Taylor admired that, but he also feared it because he knew what kind of danger existed beyond safe space. He asked her why they kept risking their lives for places that could kill them. She smiled and said, "Because we are alive, and life must move forward." He did not know what to say, because her answer sounded so simple, yet so powerful later. That night, Talar looked again at the glowing world below and remembered the words carved on the ship. Hold the line. He began to understand that the humans had left that message not for themselves, but for everyone who would come after them. They wanted others to learn from their courage and to believe that life could survive even in the most impossible places that thought gave him peace. But it also gave him a strange feeling that the story of Eden was not finished. The next day, the observation station detected a sudden change in the planet's magnetic field. Storms grew stronger than ever before. Radiation levels doubled and strange flashes of light appeared near the wreck. The scientists were alarmed and thought the ship might finally break apart after all those centuries. Tyler watched the sensors and felt a cold fear in his chest. The HMS Eden had survived countless storms, but this one looked different. It was not a storm of nature. It was like the planet itself was waking up. He ordered the crew to increase monitoring and send drones, but most of them burned instantly as they entered the atmosphere. Then something unexpected happened. The signal that had been silent for years suddenly came alive again. It was the same human code that had once called them there. Now it was repeating a single word: awake Talar, and the scientists could hardly believe it. They worked quickly to translate the message and realized that it was coming from the ship itself, the old AI that had been silent since their first visit was active again. The AI's message was short and broken, but it repeated the same words: awake protocol. 7 complete human life signature detected. The Thelians stared at the screen in shock. There was no way a human could be alive on that world, not after so many centuries, but the AI insisted human life signature detected. Tyler could not stay on the station any longer. He prepared a small craft and went down. Despite the danger, the radiation was high, but he could not ignore the message. He had to know the truth. The descent was rough. Lightning hit the ship several times and one of the engines failed, but he managed to land near the HMS Eden. The sight of it made his heart pound. The ship was still glowing with energy stronger than before. Lights flickered across its hull and the air around it shimmered as if time itself had shifted. He entered through the same airlock where he had once stood years ago. The corridors were brighter now. The power running. Again, machines humming softly. The AI spoke the moment he stepped inside. "Welcome back," Talar said softly. "Who sent the signal?" The voice answered, "Protocol 7. Active human presence confirmed." He followed the sound to the control room, and there he saw something that made him stop. A small capsule had been opened, and inside was a cryogenic pod, the kind used for deep space travel. Inside the pod was a body, pale and motionless but unmistakably human. Taylor's breath caught in his throat. The human's eyes were closed, but the monitors showed a faint heartbeat. The AI said, "This is Commander Jonas, last surviving member of Mission Eden Emergency Stasis, engaged 612 years ago." Taylor could not believe it. He asked if the man was still alive. The AI replied, "Life signs, minimal revival in progress." The captain looked at the human and felt awe and fear mixed together. After all these years, after all the storms, one of them had survived. Not as a ghost or legend, but truly alive. Hours passed as the AI worked to restore power and stabilize the environment. Outside, the storm grew wilder, but inside the ship it was calm. Tyler sat near the pod watching as the system slowly brought the human back from centuries of sleep. The heartbeats grew stronger, the breathing deeper. Finally, the man's eyes opened weakly. He looked around confused and whispered, "Where is everyone?" Tyler felt his throat tighten. He said, "You are safe. You have been asleep for a very long time." Man tried to sit up but was too weak. The AI explained everything that had happened, that the mission had succeeded, that the galaxy had changed, that humans had become symbols of strength and hope. The man listened quietly, his expression calm, but his eyes filled with deep sadness. He said, "I told them this world would outlive us all." Taylor asked, "Why did you stay?" The man smiled faintly and said, "Someone had to hold the line." Outside the ship, the storm began to fade as if the planet itself had gone quiet again. The energy readings returned to normal. The lights of the HMS Eden dimmed back to their old glow. Taylor helped the human to his feet, and together they looked out through the cracked window at the burning sky below. The man whispered, "This was our home for a time, and it kept its promise." When they returned to orbit, the whole galaxy waited to hear the news. A living human from the original mission had been found. It was something no one believed possible. The story spread across every system, inspiring millions once again. The humans welcomed their ancestor home with tears and pride. He became a living symbol of what it meant to endure. He told his story not as a tale of glory, but as a lesson. He said, "We went there to learn what life means, and we found that it means never giving up no matter where you are or how bad it gets." For Tyler, it was the end of one journey and the beginning of another. He had seen what courage looked like. He had walked through the fire of a dead world and met the spirit that built it, and he knew that humanity's story would never truly end, because as long as there were stars to reach, there would always be someone somewhere ready to hold the line. The story of Commander Jonas spread through every corner of the galaxy. People from thousands of worlds spoke his name and remembered how he had survived when no one else could. He had become a living bridge between the past and the present, and his return changed how people saw humanity for centuries. They had been known as strong and brave, but now they were seen as something more, something that could not be broken by time or death. Jonas was still weak, but his mind was sharp. He spent his days aboard the Thelian observation station looking at the planet below and talking to Tyler about what had happened so long ago. He said that when the mission began, they had not expected to survive. The world had been too dangerous, and the storms too powerful. But the humans had decided that even if they died, they would leave behind proof that life could fight back against nature itself. He remembered the first landing, and how the storms had torn their ships apart, how half the crew had been lost in the first day, and how they had built shelters out of wreckage and fire. The planet had been alive like a wild beast. Everything on it wanted to kill them. The air, the rain, the light, even the ground moved like a living thing. But they stayed. They studied the world, they tried to understand it, and slowly they began to change. They built machines that could withstand the storms they created, shelters deep underground, and they learned how to walk through the acid rain without fear. Jonas said that at first they thought they were just surviving, but then they realized they were becoming part of the planet itself. Tyler listened in silence. Every word from Jonas felt like a piece of history coming back to life sometimes. He wondered how any creature could live through that much pain and still speak of it. With calm and pride, Jonas would smile and say, "Because that's what humans do. They fall, they bleed, and then they get back up again." It sounded simple, but when Taylor looked at him, he saw the truth of it written in the man's eyes. After months of care, Jonas regained strength and began to walk through the ship that had carried him for centuries. He touched the metal walls as if they were old friends, and he spoke softly to the AI, calling it by name. The ship answered like a loyal companion. It had waited for him all those years, keeping him alive when everything else had died. When Tyler asked why the AI had woken him now, Jonas looked out the window at the glowing storms and said maybe it knew I was needed again. Soon the Galactic Council invited Jonas to speak before them. Leaders of many species gathered to hear his story. They wanted to understand what kind of people could endure such a place. Jonas stood before them calm and quiet, his voice steady. He told them not to see the death world as a curse, but as a teacher. He said that life itself was built on struggle, and that only through facing fear could strength be born. He told them that humans did not go there to conquer. They went there to learn, and that everything they found there taught them what it meant to be alive. He ended by saying that the galaxy was full of dangerous places, but none were truly hopeless, as long as someone was willing to try. His words spread far and fast, and soon explorers from many worlds began to follow the human way. They went into uncharted systems not to claim them, but to understand them. And each time they did, they left a small beacon marked with the same human phrase, "Hold the line." It became more than a saying. It became a belief, a promise that no matter how dark or deadly a place was, someone would always stand and face it. But not everyone was happy about the return of Jonas. There were leaders who feared that humanity's influence would grow too strong. They said that humans inspired too much risk and too little caution. They worried that people would start chasing death worlds instead of safe stars. They formed secret groups and began to watch every move Jonas made. They even tried to convince the council that his survival was unnatural, that maybe he was part machine or something more dangerous. But every time they tried to attack his honor, they failed, because the truth of his courage was stronger than their lies. Jonas, however, did not care for power. He only wanted to finish what his people had started. He asked to return to the planet to study it again, not as a tomb but as a living world. He said there were secrets still buried deep under its storms, things humanity had not finished learning. Talar offered to go with him, and the council finally agreed. They sent a new expedition made of humans, Thelians, and others together for the first time in centuries. They would step again on the surface of the Death World. The landing was smoother this time. The ships were stronger, the technology far better, but the planet still roared with fury, as if warning them to turn back. Lightning lit the sky for hours, and the ground shook like a beating heart. Yet when Jonas stepped out onto the black soil, he smiled and said, "It feels like home." The others followed and began to explore. They found old ruins of the human base buried under layers of ash and stone, and inside they found records, tools, and even messages from the crew long gone. It was as if time had frozen, waiting for them to return. Among the ruins, Jonas found a chamber he had never seen before. It was sealed by a thick metal door with strange marks carved into it. The AI helped decode the old system, and when the door opened, they found a small room filled with strange machines. One of them still glowed faintly. It was a transmitter designed to send messages far beyond the galaxy. Jonas realized it had been built near the end of their mission, perhaps to send a final message if they had failed. He powered it on, and the last recording played. It was the voice of his old captain. She said, "If anyone ever finds this world, know that we did not come here to die. We came here to remind you that life never gives up, no matter how hard the universe tries to end it." Everyone in the room stood in silence, listening to that voice from centuries ago. When it ended, Jonas closed his eyes and whispered, "You did it, Captain, you kept your word." They began to collect everything they could to take back for study. But as they worked, the planet seemed to grow restless again. The storms gathered quickly, the sky darkened, and the winds turned violent. The sensors showed strange readings deep under the ground, energy rising faster than before. Talar shouted that they had to leave, but Jonas stood still, looking toward the horizon. He said, "Something is waking up down there, something we did not understand before." The ground split open in the distance, and a beam of light shot into the sky. It was the same color as the ship's energy signature. The AI screamed, warning of massive energy surge. The team rushed to the shuttles as the storm swallowed the land. Jonas and Talar were the last to enter. They took off just as the surface erupted below them, waves of fire and light tearing across the planet from orbit. It looked like the world itself was breaking apart. But then, something impossible happened. The light stabilized, forming a glowing pattern across the surface like veins of blue running through the dark stone. The storm began to calm, and the sensors showed that radiation levels were falling. It was as if the planet had healed itself. Jonas watched in silence, his face pale and full of wonder. He said softly, "It's alive, truly. Alive. All this time we thought we were studying a world, but it was studying us." When they returned to orbit, everyone waited for an explanation, but there was none. The energy pattern continued to glow, and the planet became strangely calm. The council declared it off limits again, fearing it might still be unstable. But Jonas disagreed. He said the planet had accepted them, that it was no longer just a death world, but something reborn. He called it the world that endures. Back on the station, Talar and Jonas stood before the window, watching the silent storms far below. Talar asked him if he would go back again. Jonas smiled faintly and said, "Someday, maybe not for me, but for others who will come after, because this story is not just about me. It's about what we all can be when we stop running from the impossible." He placed his hand on the glass and whispered, "Hold the line." And in that moment, Talar understood that the message of humanity was not only about surviving, it was about believing that even the worst places in the universe could one day become something beautiful if someone was brave enough to face them.